Good evening again, and welcome to an ELIT webinar on engagement tips and tricks for all learners. One of the things that you're going to find throughout this presentation is that we have lots of ways to engage our learners. It may be uncomfortable for us because it's not how we have typically engage. So feel free to get out of that comfort zone and try some new things after this webinar. My name is Paige Durham. I'm the instructional designer at Germanna Community College. We have a lot of people in the chat. Three of them are Jason Vance, Nova Wright, and Forrest Smith. They will be answering your questions in the chat. So if you have any questions or you need something repeated or you're not sure about something, please feel free to put those in the chat. So tonight I'm going to talk about three areas of engagement. The three areas that I'm going to focus on are motivation, progression, and participation. And notice that I put them in a cycle because there's really no one place to start. So I wanted to make this so that it's kind of things that kind of flow into one another as well as they kind of feed off of one another. So you may ask, why those three areas? I picked those three areas because it was based off of the research of John Hattie and the visible learning meta X, and that's supposed to be a little X. And we're only going to focus on the teaching strategies. And I'm going to show you that website in just a second. And so that you can have a look and you can see where these things came from. So give me 1 second and I'm going to pop over to another window and I will show you that index. All right, so this is the visible learning meta X. And here you can see, you can scroll down, you can look at influences by domain, student, homeschool, teacher. I am focusing on teaching strategies. So if I click on this, this is the research database, and I can take these results and I can click on impact on student achievement, and I can decide on the effect size. I chose the strategies that had the most effect. So when you're listening to this presentation, this is kind of where all of the information came from, but I did want this to have you have access to this as well, so that you can look at it, and then you can also, again, you can filter by domain, you can also filter by impact on student achievement. All right, so now back to my three areas. I have motivation, participation, and progression. And with these, I decided that I was going to pick three examples to give you under each one. So motivation, we're going to talk about the jigsaw method, immediacy, and cooperative and social learning. Then for participation, we're going to talk about flexible discussions, questioning, and self-directed learning. And then for progression, we're going to talk about an alignment map, formative feedback, and self-progress checks. So let's begin with motivation. So we got to get that intrinsic motivation going somehow, right? So sometimes it takes the external to get to the internal. So I'm going to start with the first thing called a jigsaw. So what is it? If you don't know anything about jigsaw, you're going to see that it is basically small groups that work together, and in that small group they become experts, and then you break that group apart and you put all of the different experts together in a group, and then that makes a new group, and then within that new group they come up with some kind of assignment or project or presentation to share with each other. And then the students can see how different groups presented their topics, and they got to teach each other. So the whole idea is getting the students to become the expert and then become the teacher. So, whoa, but what does this look like in Canvas? So in Canvas, you have a couple options. So here we are, ta-da, in Canvas. And I actually went ahead and I put in a module. And I'm going to show you how I built out a jigsaw activity inside of Canvas. So the topic is Dickens. And this first link is actually a teacher kind of instruction guide on some things that you can do. And I will show it to you briefly so you can see where I got this information from. So this is actually an activity that came from the Bell Foundation, and it goes through and it talks about what you need, ideas for using this. Again, this may seem like something that you may think it seems elementary. However, think about the idea that elementary school students and middle school students are using these kinds of things in their online environment. And then we are not continuing that into higher ed. So that's the first thing that you see in the module. It's kind of a teacher handout. The next thing that I created was a page that has a dictogloss or a PowerPoint that talks about the life of Charles Dickens and has pictures and some things on here. And of course, if we scroll to the bottom, the next thing you see is a discussion group. And these are group discussions, and the student would pick their group based on the novel that they wanted to become an expert in. And they will be talking and looking for things that are characters and famous quotes, and they are, going to be they're going to be the expert. And then that group is going to be taken apart and jigsawed together with all of the other novels, and then there will be a final group project. So the next item is, of course, the Dickens presentation. So they've been reorganized into new groups, and then they will submit that project here. Now, can it be a video? It can be anything that they want, a PowerPoint, a video, it can be a movie if they wanted to create it. However, they want to present their information that they put together from that being those experts in those groups. So that is an example of a jigsaw. So hopefully that will give you some ideas on ways you could incorporate breaking those groups and then allowing the students to be the experts, and then putting all of that together and making them the teachers to give you a final product so that you have the way to assess whether or not they covered everything that they need to have covered in the content. So now on to, or back to, I should say. So here's just that example that I showed you. So again, after the research, they're reorganized, they do a presentation, and then they can share it with the class as well, not only just to turn it in as an assignment, but it could be used also as study materials or an exam. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is immediacy. So this is the reduced social distance between faculty and student due to an awareness of approachability, caring, and competence. So ways to do that: instructor feedback, instructor interaction and support. If a student asks you something about, I don't know, they need a laptop, they can't get in touch with somebody, you taking the time to either point them in the right direction or reach out to a contact and give it to them. That's one of those things. Sending emails using the Canvas inbox. Response time. How long does it take you to respond to students? Greetings. You know, when you're in your making your announcements, how are you talking to the students? Are you talking to them in a familiar way? Are you using you? And those kinds of things. Self-disclosure. You know, students like to see you making mistakes in your videos because it makes you human. We all know that we all like to watch the bloopers, and students do too. So when you're making your videos, they don't want to see perfection. They want to see you, being normal, being making mistakes, floundering over your words or fumbling over your words, or searching for that right word. And the ums are an okay thing as long as they're not too many ums. So, and then having personal photos. And you notice that in my assignments that I showed you, I used Bitmoji. Why? Because it's fun. And that element of fun and humor gets their attention. Um, Everything is so serious anyway in life right now. So anything that you can do to bring in a little humor really helps students to relax and helps build that bond that you're trying to build with the immediacy. And again, it makes you human. So what does that look like in Canvas? So it is things like announcements. So think about posting positive things weekly at a minimum. You know, my first couple weeks of any class, they get a lot of announcements. And I actually have the feature so that they can post a comment to the announcement, and then they can use the like option. I actually have them respond with avatars or GIFs or things like that because it helps me to understand things that are interesting to them. Because maybe that conversation that I need to have later on in the semester about a serious thing, after I've built the relationship and built the community and built that trust, that conversation is much easier to have. When you're doing your self introductions, use videos, use pictures, use fun pictures, use funny pictures, use filters, Snapchat, anything that gets their attention. And don't be afraid to step outside your box and put up things that are fun for you. Again, we're talking about building that relationship, and in order to do that, you have to be open. You have to open yourself some in order for them to open themselves. Give them some fun facts. For example, I always like to put in my ITE 115 class that I'm a harpist, because everybody's like, harpist, like heart, no, harp, as in like, that angels play. And that's always a fun fact because people are like, oh, well, those two things are very interesting. So give them some things that are outside of the norm so that they can give you some things so that you can, again, use those to build that bridge and take that extra step to create that community. Use 5-minute videos, no longer. Every week, put a video in your module, 5 minutes, talking about the things that are going to be covered and any other things that might hold them up or any challenges that they might experience in that. But again, 5 minutes. And you can always put in a question at the end, but if you use Studio, so that students can, so that you can see that they've watched it, but also so that students feel like it was worth their time to watch the 5 minutes. So think about also having how it feels conversations. Process, not content. How do you feel about learning online? How did you feel about the assignment this week? Not actually focusing on the content, not thinking about, those quadratic equations were very difficult. Think about what you can include to ask them what kind of things are affecting how they might be learning. Also think about including targeted motivation. So midterms, you might want to put some kind of announcement with some kind of crazy GIF that, that might be like, halfway over the hump, you're almost there. And then of course, the week before finals, you want to make sure you really pump them up to get them motivated to finish it out and get to the finish line. And then the last thing is intentional word choices. So using our versus the, we versus you, highlights versus feedback. So you might want to use that highlights versus feedback. So highlights would be something that you could mention in an announcement, talking about some of the things that you saw as you were going over the assignments and you were grading. Instead of just saying the feedback from this week, that's very dry and not very personable. So a few more tips. So a call to action. Ask them and tell them, how does this course that you're taking fit into their big picture? Okay, I said the big picture, but it's not just it's their big picture. So how does it fit into the scope of what they're doing? What are the things that are in your course that are going to be lifelong skills that they're going to use over and over and over again? Make sure you bring that out to them and at the very early in the semester so that they understand and that they grasp that this is a personable course and it means something to you and it will mean something to them. Communication timeline. In your syllabus, make sure you're very clear about how often you will be responding to their emails and grading, and how long on weekends or in evenings it's going to take you to respond to a message that they send you. Let them know so that they don't expect that 2-second response time. And then the last thing is be patient with your students and with yourself. In this environment, patience is something that we often lose sight of. We get frustrated, Zoom doesn't work, Canvas doesn't work, the internet's down. And you know what? We just have to stop for a second, take a big breath in and realize that we're all going to get through it and it will be fine. So just be patient with yourself and your students. So now cooperative and social learning. So what is it? Cooperative learning is using small groups that work together, and then social learning is thinking about modeling and observing behavior and attitudes and emotional reactions of other people. So they're watching each other. So procedures. So establishing clear goals, keep groups mid-sized, establish group norms. You make sure your groups are diverse. Take a look. If you notice that they're signing up, the same groups of students are signing up together. If you have multiple group projects, that's when you might want to step in and say, hey, this next project, I'm going to put you and make new groups for them. Build that trust and promote open communication. For larger tasks, maybe create group roles. So have a group leader and have a note taker and have a presenter and give them specific roles, or give them the list and have them pick their own role so that all of the group members are equally important and that no one gets left out by the type A who wants to do it all. Create pre and post tests. So create a pre-test so you can see where your students are, so that you can think about providing a different path for some students who may not have some background knowledge that they need in order to be successful. And also create a post-test to make sure that you covered all of the objectives and everything that you need to cover for that unit. Also consider the process as part of the assignment. So assessment, excuse me. So thinking about process. So how did they get to that assessment? When they were going over the process, count that as part of their grade and use it and let them know that process is important. Even in an online environment, you can see what they're doing. You can use analytics. You can go in and you can check to see if they're watching the studio videos, how much they're watching. So there are all different kinds of things that you can use to help them understand that the process is part of the assessment. Use new strategies. So the things that we're talking about tonight might be new to you. They may not be, but there are hundreds of things. I showed you the visible learning index, so you can use that to pick up new strategies. and allow group work to help them reduce anxiety. For example, in the Zoom sessions, breakout rooms, give them a very specific question and let them go to a breakout room and talk about it and discuss with their peers what exactly they're supposed to be doing, so that they don't feel like you're asking them a question in an environment and they have to answer. Give them all the ability to discuss it, then come back and ask the question again to the entire group, because your shy student now may feel more comfortable actually answering with the larger group. And again, establish those group interactions, exactly like I said, for example, in breakout rooms and group discussions and group projects. So what does all of that look like in Canvas? Hold please. So I'm going to let you read this quote. And now we're going to talk about something I really like. It's called a choice board. So we're going to take a look at a choice board. We are, as soon as I get the right screen. Lots of things going on today. Here we go. All right, so we're back in Canvas. This is a page. This is a choice board. Each of these, as you can see, if I hover over each little plus, is actually a link to an article. And the assignment is pick an article that interests you, read it, and then the next thing they're going to do is get together with a group of people that chose the same article and discuss it. So again, choice boards, all of these have to do with engagement in an online classroom. However, they're all slightly different, so they can choose which article interests them. Now, could they read them all? Absolutely, but they only have to choose one in order to pick their group. So here you can see it is another group discussion based on the titles of the articles. And then they can pick their group, and then there are 3 questions that they need to answer in their group. So again, these are things that they would do outside of class, and then the next class meeting, it would be a group discussion, and each article, we would go over each article in class to talk about the things that were new, the things that were challenging, or any new questions, and also anything that you automatically connected it with and why that article was the one that you chose. So, process for developing a choice board. So you're going to select the content or the unit. Then you're going to think about the instructional resources or methods that can be used. Pick from a list, and then have the students pick 2 or 3 or 1 that they're interested in, and then create that assessment so you can see if they learned what they needed to learn. And again, I would say that the assessment piece comes after the larger meeting in class. So for example, after the choice board discussion and then the class meeting, the assessment would be on engagement, which was the topic that I chose. So what did you already know? What did you learn? What are the things that you're challenged with? How is this different in an online environment? And those kind of things would be the assessment piece that would come after the other 2 parts. Now on to participation. So flexible discussions. We all know how to use discussions in the sense that we can have it relate to our content in our class. However, these are a little bit outside of that box. So think about having a discussion posted at the end of a face-to-face class or in our case, not necessarily face-to-face meaning in Zoom and synchronous, that they could continue the conversation. So, for example, the choice board discussion, if after the class meeting, if there were still people who wanted to discuss engagement and challenging ideas and activities, or there were topics that came up or ideas that didn't quite fully get shared, they would have that discussion board so that they could continue that conversation. And then, of course, in the next class, you could talk about, that open discussion that happened afterwards. The other thing you can do is you can turn on the chat tool in Canvas to allow during those synchronous sessions so that students can either ask questions of each other, or you can ask questions, or they can share ideas. And that's one way to do that. Of course, that means that they are going to be in Zoom and Canvas at the same time. So that might take a little technology training at the beginning to cover that. And then also, when you're thinking about discussions, encourage text, audio, or video so they can have the ability to express themselves in the way that they are most comfortable. Also, talk to them about using captions in Studio. Why? Because other students may need them, and it's a great way to bring that awareness to students who aren't necessarily thinking about their videos need to be captioned for students who may have sensory disabilities. The next thing in participation is questioning strategies. So think about having students ask questions of themselves while they're learning your content. And what do I mean by that? So think about you're reading information on a page in Canvas, and right in the middle of the page is a question. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't even have to have an answer. It's just a question. And that question will give the student that opportunity to stop and think about something, even if they don't have, even if you're not collecting responses or they aren't writing them down. It's one of those times that you can get them to pause and think about what it is that they're reading or watching. The other thing you can think about using questioning strategies doing is using uncovering background knowledge. I like to use this example. So think about teaching a math concept, and one of the things that you're using is measurement, and you talk about the distance between the tee on a par 5 hole on a golf course and a par 3. If you don't know anything about golf, you're already at a disadvantage. If you don't know the background knowledge that your students are coming with, it's very difficult to write questions that they're going to be successful in answering. So you may want to give them the opportunity to have an essay that gives, that explains how something is done or how they would do something, because that will give you ideas on what the student is coming to you with as far as their background knowledge. Also create open discussion boards and have students post their own questions there. Have them maybe a muddiest forum kind of post, or just a open discussion on any topic. But let them have that discussion board as their place to connect with their peers. And also you can gamify it by letting them like other students' posts in Canvas, so that you can use that like option, which makes it more like a social media kind of thing. Self-directed learning. So self-directed learning, encourage the students to go back and redo activities. Don't limit difficult topics to a one-time attempt. Give them the opportunity to go back and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. If need be, make supplemental materials that link to that module. So if those students are struggling, they can click on a link, and then they can be taken maybe to a different website where they can pick up some new extra practices or things like that. Think about using mastery paths to automatically release those supplemental materials based on the performance on that quiz or assignment. So based upon the score that they achieved, there would be a next path for them to go to in case they needed to go back and review a certain part or certain topic. And it would be something that you would set up in advance, and then based upon what they're doing, it would point them in the direction that they needed to go. And then the end goal, of course, which is why it's called a mastery, is because however the path, whatever the path they took to get to the end, you will know that they have actually mastered that content before they move on. And lastly, as part of that is use differentiated assignments. So think about taking assignments, and you may have students who are English language learners who need something done differently. Think about taking the assignment and giving it to those students and differentiating based upon the needs in your class. And does that mean that everybody won't have the same assignment? Absolutely. But do they all get the same content? Yes. And do they all have the same kind of assessment measurement? Yes. It just looks different in each area. And what does that look like in Canvas? So you have all of these Canvas tools. You have discussions, you have the chat, you have quizzes, modules, you have announcements that you can turn on, and you can allow them to like your announcement as well as like a discussion post. You have mastery paths, and then you have differentiated assignments by using the option at the bottom of the assignment to choose the students that need that assignment, or based upon their mastery path, that would be the assignment that they would get. And progression. So what is progression? Deliberate improvement as part of learning, advancement toward learning goals. So we have alignment map, formative feedback, and self-progress checks. So what is an alignment map? An alignment map is exactly what it sounds like. How do the things in your course line up? Why do students want to see this? Because it gives them the answer to the question of, why am I doing this? So we have our module objectives, which contain behavior, condition, and degree. Then we have the learning materials that support that objective. So whatever it is, whether it's the readings, the videos, the PowerPoints, the activities, whatever it is you have. And then we have the activities that are actually the interaction with the learner. Now, we also have to remember that in a course, we need to have 3 different kinds of interaction. We need to have student-to-student interaction, student-to-instructor interaction, and student-to-content interaction. So those activities that you think about trying to have all of those 3 types of activities in your course. And then the last thing, of course, is your assessment that evaluates the progress of achieving that stated learning objective. But why? Okay, so the answer is exactly, but why? So this helps the learner to see that each learning outcome is achievable, and that there are materials and activities that help them build that comprehension and ability. It also shows clarity and transparency. So students aren't questioning why they're doing something. And it kind of gives them the ability to take ownership of their own learning. It also prevents information overload. So when you're creating this alignment map, you may see some things that you don't really need that aren't exactly aligned with what you're trying to do. So even though you may love those activities, you may have to cut them out, or you may find that they fit better somewhere else. And then, of course, it helps you also to determine if your assessment is accurately measuring your learning objective. But what does that look like in Canvas? So here we are back in Canvas, and I'm going to click on the course map. Now, I have chosen to use a Google Doc, and it's telling me that I need to authorize this, so I'll click on authorize, and now it's going to give me another window. Not sure why, but that's okay. Okay, there we go. So now we can see this course mapping. It says template, but it's not really a template. It's actually completed. So you can see here, we have the general education outcome. We have the course outcomes. Also looking at these, you see there's no to know and to understand in here, except for this one right here. So, and in these, in the chart, you see that there are module objectives, learning materials, activities, and then an assessment. So students would have an idea exactly what they're doing and why. And it would alleviates the, I don't understand why I had to do this. How does this relate to questions that students often give to us? So again, I used a Google Doc and I embedded this inside of Canvas so that I wouldn't have to, if I needed to make changes, I could just make changes on the Google Doc, and then I wouldn't have to worry about making changes in Canvas and trying to keep it updated in Canvas, and I could put it in multiple courses and only change it once. All right. Next, we're going to talk about is feedback. So key points of feedback. So you want to make it goal referenced, tangible and transparent, actionable. What are they going to do with what you are giving them? User friendly, specific and personalized. Are you using their name in the comment that you're leaving in SpeedGrader? Or is it just a generic comment? Timely. How long is it taking you to get to SpeedGrader and leave comments? Ongoing. Does it start at the beginning of the semester, and are students always, are they ready for the feedback that you're going to give them? And consistent. Again, I think this goes back to the whole thing is that students are looking for that consistency so that they know what to expect. And by knowing that, it helps them build that trust relationship, and that trust relationship is the key to opening the door and having them comfortable enough to engage in any activity or any content that you present to them. So formative feedback, what are these examples? So here are 3 kinds of things that you can use in Canvas. We have discussions, quizzes, and assignments. Rubrics can be used as formative feedback, and you can add them to a discussion, a quiz, and an assignment. And I'll be honest with you, I did not know that you could add a rubric to a quiz, but I did find that out today. Peer reviews, another way for students to use their own comments to help their peers and give a different perspective. And again, you can use peer reviews in discussions or assignments, but not in quizzes. And annotations or comments. So you can leave comments and discussions. You can leave quizzes, and you can have feedback automatic, or you can have overall feedback that you provide. And you can also leave assignments, or have assignments have comments and annotations. What does that look like in Canvas? Well, that's what you're going to look at in SpeedGrader. So if you look in SpeedGrader, you notice you can leave video feedback, you can leave audio feedback, you can annotate by using the annotation tools, and you can also leave comments. So you might leave a comment before you actually give a grade, but you need to prepare your students. That's something that they need to look for. So they need to look for those comments, and they need to make sure that they know what you're doing with them. So leaving comments is great if you can do it and your students know that they're there before you actually give them a grade for whatever it is that they're doing. And self-progress checks. So what can we do to help students figure out where they are and show them and give them the tools for them to take ownership of their own learning? So these are some things and tools in Canvas that we have that students can use to check themselves. So students actually can use new analytics so that they can see how their own participation can be related to performance. So they have that ability. You as the instructor would need to turn new analytics on for the students. Grades. Teach your students about using the what if function to calculate their grade. For example, everybody always wants to know, what do I need to get on my final exam to get an A in this class? If you show them at the beginning of the semester how to do that what if, then when that comes up at the end, they'll already know how to do it. Also, teach them to use their own and create their own to-dos in their Canvas calendar. You don't have to do it for them. They can do it themselves. So they can use that as a guide of what to do next. They can also use it as a planning. And that calendar is key to helping them organize themselves for all of their classes in one place. And then you can also use some self-check quizzes so that you can see where there are knowledge gaps. So you know that you can provide some more content for them to increase that gap or to close the gap so that they have all of the information that they need. And again, what does that look like in Canvas? It looks like all of the things that we talked about. It's as a student taking ownership and looking at your grades. So here is a document that says, how do I view new analytics in a course as a student? So if you click on this link, it's going to take you to a Canvas guide. How do I add a to-do item in the list view dashboard as a student so that they would see that when they sign in, they'll know they have something to do? How do I add an event to my calendar as a student so that they can put events in so that they can keep themselves on track? How do I approximate this is the what if grade feature? And then how do I view a rubric for a quiz? So all of those things, and these are how-tos for students that you could put in an announcement at the beginning of the course, or you could do it now because we've all just started. So take these links and create an announcement and, you know, maybe make a little video, put some GIF in that would allow them to kind of figure out what it is you're trying to ask them to do. You know, get them interested. Take that time that you have with them to the first few weeks to really build on that collaboration and that community. And it is a different style of communication than many of us are comfortable in. And it really is outside the box. And, you know, tell the students it's not your comfort zone. And tell, you know, hey, well, what do you do when X happens when you're using your phone? You know, or ask them questions about, are they using the Canvas student app? And if they're not, they might want to, because they may be using that cell phone as a key piece of technology for interaction with you and their classmates. So That was a lot of me talking. And again, I am going to give you this presentation. And I would like you to, I'm going to click on the link here. I'm actually going to copy that, or maybe I'm not. Uh, so I'm going to give you the link in the chat in just a second to create an evaluation. I'm also going to give you the link to this slide presentation so that you can have all of the links and have those things to go back and reflect on, and anything that interests you, you have the materials right there at your hand so that you can, when you have a moment to breathe, you can actually investigate a new thing that you might want to try with your students. I'd like to thank you all again for spending the past 50 minutes with me. I'm pretty sure I went pretty fast, and I see there are lots of comments in the chat, but I'm hoping that you will let me know if there are questions that you have. And again, I'm going to put those two links in just a second.